Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I've seen tons of videos with very clickbait titles on what measuring tools to buy, how to measure your lumber, what you should buy, what you shouldn't buy, how you're doing it wrong. And I imagine it's very frustrating for a lot of you. I think there's just an awful lot of hype about this, so I wanted to put together this video on how to buy tools. Not what tools you have to buy or shouldn't buy, the tools that I use to measure accurately for client commissions, and some examples of more expensive tools that I think are really worth it. I'll put in some clips of videos that I've done on my client commission videos, and I'll put some links in the description to those if you want to see more details. Before we talk about measuring tools, there's a couple of things that we need to all agree on. Wood moves across the grain with humidity and temperature changes. The wood pores absorb moisture and they spread out or they contract, particularly in the winter when it's cold and very dry. Or if you go from a very humid climate to Arizona, to the desert. So when you acknowledge that wood moves, then how you measure it is very important. Going to the thousandths of an inch is a waste of time, let's be honest. So when you measure things, measure to a tolerance of, I usually go a 1/16 of an inch, sometimes a 32nd. People get really crazed about absolutely perfect dovetails and absolutely perfect joinery, which we all want. The story I'll tell you is I took a trip to George Nakashima's studio in New Hope, Pennsylvania. We saw some of George's original furniture. And me being a furniture maker, I was crawling behind furniture and looking underneath it. And what I found out was that George's dovetails were not perfect. He was an incredible human being and an incredible craftsman. But we are humans. The first subject I want to cover is measuring tools. I see lots of videos about don't buy woodpeckers, it's crazy expensive, buy Chinese stuff, oh no that's crappy and you can't return it if there's a problem. So basic tools like a carpenter's triangle square and your classic Stanley or Starrett if you want to buy it, measuring tool and squareness tool. These are really good and they may not be perfect. If they're damaged you can always check them. A carpenter's square, you can get bigger ones and just check and see if they're accurate. And this 45 degree is usually pretty darn accurate. And I'll use that if I'm cutting miters to put that into a miter and make sure I'm getting a 45 and then the matching face to make sure that's a 45. So don't discount these tools, they're still good. Your classic tape measure can be an invaluable tool with a couple of caveats. One, no matter how good a tape measure, this end moves. And I've been told by some carpenters it's meant to move. What I have learned from professional carpenters and home builders is to burn an inch, or in their case, maybe 2 inches. So burning an inch is as simple as don't depend on the end, start at the 1 inch point and measure. So if you need to measure a foot, you start at 1 inch and you go to 13 inches. The thing that you have to do is do it consistently. So if you're building a little box or you're building a piece of casework, don't do somewhere you're burning an inch and somewhere you're ending on the edge of the tape. With all that said, I have invested in Woodpecker's measuring tools. You'll see a little bit of a wall here. I'm not sponsored by them. I just find that these tools are incredibly well machined. They are expensive and I saved up for them, but this is a small square. I believe this is a 5 inch and I bought a set of a 5 and a 7. And yes, I think the set was over $100. And I use them all the time when I'm gluing up fixed shelves or a top and a bottom or a set of legs that a case is sitting on. The T-squares, again, are incredibly accurate. They have points where I can mark with a mechanical pencil in here at every, I think it's 32nd of an inch or 16th, which is well within tolerance. I also bought a 48-inch rule. It is crazy flat, and I'll show you some videos of this now where I'm using it to check flatness on large panel glue-ups or tabletops. This is expensive. I believe this may have been $135 or $40, but I saved up for it. I wanted to go through some options that are available in marking. Again, these are options that I use. I find them very helpful. So the first thing are China markers, grease pencils. I use these when I'm buying rough lumber at a hardwood dealer, and also when I am rough cutting lumber at my shop when I first get it. So I'll rough cut it and let it acclimate. I'll use this. This happens to be a hickory piece. I can use this on cherry. And again, these are for rough cuts. The next thing is obviously a regular number 2 pencil. If you have a good sharpener, they're definitely good for a start. They can be erased on most woods. This is where you start. Mechanical pencils are the next option. These are available along with these sharpeners at Staples. They're pretty reasonable, and there's usually a little measuring setup here, and then you just run this and you get a super sharp lead. Again, I buy them in the standard lead, reds, yellows. You just put a fresh lead in here. The tip is usually sharpened. Again, on walnut, these are really good. You can use the red too. The red is really easy to see on walnut. I tend to use red a lot. Really easy to see on hickory and cherry. I'll use the yellow on some very dark woods, some of the darker pieces of walnut. This is, I think, like $8 or $9, maybe 10. These may be 15 to buy, and the leads, you get a big pack, again, for $10 to $15. The next thing, as you're trying to get finer, because as you can see here, this line has a certain width. And you need to know, am I cutting on the left, on the right, am I splitting the line? And as this dulls down, that can get to be a problem. What a lot of us who are more experienced craftsmen will use is a marking knife. These can be sharpened, usually 320 grit sandpaper. This is a very sharp point. And this is flat, so you can run it against a square. So if I put this down and I make a mark and I break the fibers, I now have an incredibly sharp, clean line, very thin, so substantially thinner than this. And if I'm cutting a rabbit or a dovetail or whatever it is, I've scored the grain, and therefore when I cut, I'm not going to get tear out. If this is my finished piece and I'm going to run a rabbet across here, whether it be a router or a hand plane, I won't get chip out on this. These are a little bit expensive, but you can buy a standard mat knife. I use these that have the breakaway knives, so you get a clean knife. I will occasionally sharpen this on a diamond stone. There's absolutely no reason to not use this if you're starting out. Again, you can do the same thing. You can mark a very clean line, whether you're marking it just for sizing, for cutting on a chop saw, whether you're doing fine joinery. You can obviously mark this. So I did this with my marking knife. You can do this to mark it, and that's a nice little trick because you still have the super fine line, but to your eye, you still have a line that you can look at, and you can make a note, cut here. So the next piece, again, a little more expensive, a little more accurate, is a marking gauge. They make these in singles and doubles. The Japanese versions, which are really beautiful and very effective, I don't happen to have one, they use a knife similar to this at the end. This uses a carbide wheel. If I wanted to mark at exactly 1 inch, let's say I'm making a rabbit, I mark this, I lock down this little wheel, very accurate. So let's say that I was going to run a 1 inch rabbet on this. Then you just take this and you run this and mark this. These are replaceable. There's a little Phillips screw at the end here. So these again are very helpful. A little more expensive. You definitely don't need this when you're starting out. This should help you in your joinery as you're moving through from rough wood, or if you're buying S2S finished wood, to mark and have clean joinery. Always remember to mark the side that is keep or to cut. Story poles, again, are something that I started hearing about from very high quality home builders. On a recent build, and I'll put in a picture, I use this story pole to track every fixed shelf, every drawer unit, and I measured this 3 or 4 times, and I checked my plans. But once I measured this, I marked this in blue tape where the drawer was going to sit and where the next drawer sat, and then the next divider. So you have a divider, a drawer, and a divider. I did not measure after this. I had built my exterior casework, I'll show you a picture here, and then I just used my story pole when I was routing in the dados for the fixed shelves, when I was setting up runners, my hardwood runners that I use on drawers. So again, it was a point of reference. I would line this up on the left side, I would line it up on the center, and I would line it up on the right side. I will use this layout stick on the center panel, which obviously has a left and right side, and then I will start cutting my dados. When I set up my drawer fronts and cut the chamfers, they were within a 32nd of an inch all exact. So story poles, even for a small cabinet, are really, really helpful. Take the time to do it, measure things out, mark them. The next thing I want to cover are some shop tools that I use for assembly that I bought. First one I want to show you are these woodpecker joint clamps. So imagine you have a joint, you're gluing up a big tabletop, and you want to make sure that even if you're using dominoes or dowels or biscuits, you want to make sure that the edges, the left and right edge, the ends, are absolutely flat. These are really incredibly reasonable. They're plastic. They just happen to be machined really well, and I bought a set of, I think I bought 12 of these, maybe even 16, so I can do a very large table that has 4 joints on each side, and you need 2 of them and so on. This is an example of me using the Woodpecker's panel alignment tools. I have 2 of them here, and I'm aligning a panel glue up with 3 lengths of lumber that ended up having a perfect edge that required minimal sanding. The next tool that I bought and I used for a long time are these Bessie square clamps. This tool is made so that when you have, let's say, a drawer and you want to glue it up and you want to make sure that the left side and the front, or the left side and the back, whatever, are dead square, you clamp it up, and they're pretty much self-centering, and they can do unequal widths of wood. They're very good. I do find that sometimes they mark on the wood. This is another shop-made tool. I built this out of 3/4 inch high quality plywood, and you cut these angles and a hole here. And this is used for 90-degree glue up. You clamp these two together, and I made sure this is exactly 90 degrees. I did the flop test where you go like this, and if it's square and clamps cleanly to both sides, it's guaranteed it's a 90-degree. You can clamp inside this hole, you can clamp here, and then you clamp here, or if it's really long you can do both. But you can put a lot of pressure on this. You may put some blue tape in here if you don't want squeeze out, if you want the squeeze out to come on the outside. And this is a really reasonable tool that you can make in the shop for a couple dollars. I have 12 of these, and I use them on every single casework glue up that I do. The last thing I want to cover are these squares that I built. I'll show you some video in a moment for this. So I built these for a very large casework glue. I needed these as I glued up the side to the bottom, the center panel to the bottom, and the top to make sure this was dead square. I checked it with my woodpecker's square to make sure this was dead square. I checked the angles to make sure they were 45s. I needed to make sure, again, within what we talked about earlier about tolerances, that within a 32nd, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and that made fitting drawers, drawer runners, drawer fronts, and doors much easier. You'll see that I've made myself some 90-degree braces here. This is from kiln dried construction lumber. I made this, jointed, planed this, and then put it on my table saw crosscut sled so that I can make sure this is exactly 90 degrees in the glue up, and it's higher up than my other squares that I use for small casework. I've also checked with a known engineer square that this is dead square here. This is glued into a rabbet in the bottom. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and send me any questions that you have about any of the shop made or tools that I've purchased.